somebody's defense or their ability to represent themselves in the legal community should in no way be tied to their ability to pay. And honestly, in West Virginia, it's not just ability to pay, it's almost below the poverty line for what is able to qualify for a public defender. So in that point, I feel the need to be able to play my role, play my part, and to give back to my community. Even more working with juvenile defense, every child deserves a voice in court. And I'm very lucky in West Virginia that children have a lot of the same protections or even more than adults to have that voice in court. Overall, what gets me through every day is the kids. It's very hard for me to sit day in and day out and listen to the trauma that these children have endured. I had a child not too long ago that said he was 9 the first time he pulled a heroin needle out of his dad's arm when he was passed out. And now this child, of course, is having issues in school and otherwise, and to look back about where that trauma comes from. But the resiliency of the children that I work with is what gets me through every day. And the fact that they are able to grow and the fact that they are able to learn and be able to work with them and to help them gain their goals. In little as something as working through some of their trauma or something as getting an A in school. So I'm always so excited when I have kids that are able to complete their high school diplomas who never thought they'd be able to because they didn't have the support of parents or because of abuse and neglect situations are no longer in touch with the parents. So being able to be a support and help my community is definitely what helps. Secondary trauma is real. And there have been days where I have had to listen back to back and helping kids listen to these stories of what they've dealt with, things that I would never wish on my worst enemy, but to see them smile. To see them have hope and to be able to be with them on what is possibly the worst day of their life. Sometimes they are in shackles and jumpsuits and have had the absolute worst day of their life, but be able to be that hand to help them through that to possibly what could be a new beginning, a new start. It's kind of what keeps me going in this field and why I so enjoy working with the juveniles.
I'm on the other hand, I grew up in Clark County and I didn't have a role model. I just did what everybody else was doing and I thought it was okay. I didn't have anybody to teach me or show me what was right, what was wrong. So I just figured it out on my own. So going back home and being a role model and being in the security aspect of it, because everybody thinks it's never going to happen in my town. My town is too little. It won't happen, but I'm here to tell them that it will happen. I'm a little bit older than most of the people out there, and they think that this will never happen. I've seen a lot, so I'm bringing to the table that it does happen. And most of the people back home, I know their parents, I know the grandparents, so it's easier for them to talk to me before they get to that point. And as far as, the aspect of getting to truancy, so they have to go to court, I can get there and figure out why they're not coming. So if you can have a safe school environment, you have a bright future, a safe place for them to learn. We meet with kids all day, every day. We see them more than their parents half the time. I mean, it's supposed to be a safe place, but at the same time, they're learning in their future. And right now I work in an elementary school. So I start at the younger level, and you would think 5th graders. I mean, we have a 5th grader, we only been in school for 9 weeks. 5th grader hasn't been in school in 7 weeks. So, they have to go in the house and figure out what is the problem. It's not safe for a 5th grader to be home alone. So, and now we have him coming to school. He's coming to school, he loves school. So, I'm just that role model there. And this is why I want to be in that place to help bring the youth back to where they belong and let them be a kid and enjoy the life, but also teaching them that safety is also important.
I had no idea I was going to go into policing. After I got my bachelor's degree, I was a little bit lost. And I ended up linking up with a friend who got me a job at a domestic violence shelter. And that was really pivotal for me, just kind of being exposed to certainly women in crisis, children in crisis. And from there, I actually, without going into the whole corny details in the story, I had a situation where we had a child who was having a particularly difficult time in shelter, and they called the police, and I just happened to walk by the room, and I saw the police officer on the floor with the child, and the child was laughing, and it was clear as day to me what I was supposed to be doing with my life. And then signed up for police academy, and then in my time as a police officer, it just grew from there. Kind of reflect what was said before. It means a lot to be able to be that person, you know, just to make someone laugh or to make them feel supported in a time that, you know, it's, you know, people don't call the police for a party, you know, and, you know, you're getting called to things that are, you know, that'll really make you think for a long time about a lot of things. And it was just great to feel like you can make that difference on that particular day for that particular person.
All right. Should we go to, in the order that we were in, right? Aaron, are you next? Okay, let's do it.
So I guess to answer the question of why that I do what I do is that just the underlying evidence supports that incarceration does not work when we're talking about substance misuse and addiction. It does not solve the problem. And especially when we're talking about trauma and getting to know the people that I work with, sometimes the incarceration causes more trauma or reignites trauma from the past. So to be honest with you, when I'm working with people here in community corrections at the Day Report Center, it's about meeting these people and understanding more than what led them here, and kind of being able to recognize that these are individuals that have gone through things in their past, and this is the way that they deal with it, while others of us may have been through really similar experiences, but we coped with our supportive parents, or we had privilege enough to get therapy or get treatment when we were younger, or through a faith-based community or some kind of healthy outlet like sports and music and things like that, that the individuals that I see, they just didn't have those things. So they cope with substances. And really the thing that keeps me involved in this process is being able to see people successfully complete our program, successfully get away from supervision as far as parole, probation, home confinement, things like that, and be able to live the life that they were meant to live. Reunification with children, education, careers, houses, all those kind of things that some of us consider as just like normal milestones, but it's been a real struggle. And being able to see them fulfill things, it just continues to feed into this cycle of why I do what I do. Just being there in their roughest moments, but then at the end of it, being able to see them succeed and really get out there and live their lives.
Oh, ma'am, I would like to comment on that, if that's okay.
Sure.
From my understanding, and I'm personally a psychiatry major right now, studying with mental health and especially studying age groups with children. One of the things that I've been seeing is that in this state, we are lacking proper medical funding for therapy and therapy treatments for children. Now, from what my personal experiences are, and from some other people that I know of and personally seen, there is a lot of trauma with children between the ages of 8 through 18 in this state. There are so many tragic incidents that have taken place. For example, not only the heroin crisis that has taken lives around here, as well as the opioid epidemic that we have been seeing over the past 5 years increase every time. I think there's also a proper thing that we need to have stabilized, is that we need to really invest in proper like child psychology and groups to protect these children, whether it be through Medicaid or any type of source that we need. These are children. Children should have a normal childhood where they don't see their parents overdosing, where a child does not have to experience abuse or doesn't have to experience life-altering events. And from my personal experience and looking into it and seeing a bunch of children that are struggling, whether they are privileged or not, there is a basic understanding that trauma is trauma, and a child should never have to experience life-altering events such as overdose or any of the kind. And what's dangerous is that from seeing and exploring the parts of West Virginia, the poorest parts, is that there's no proper medical funding towards this. I understand for our state that we as West Virginia are infected with substance abuse, alcohol abuse, and so forth. And with that, there is an increased risk and increased suicide rates between those ages of 6 to 18 years old. There is increased risk of suicidal behavior, and there's increase of substance abuse behavior. And I believe that with it, we should look into like other types of funding or find something other than sports or religious activities. I am a science-based person from my perspective. And with it, I feel as if even if the churches are involved or in form of counseling and such, I do not feel like it's enough. Those children deserve proper therapy, medications if needed, and proper psychotherapy. Whether they're poor, whether they are privileged, whatever the case may be, I think we really need to invest in that. Seeing
Thank
that
you so much for
how
your
community together is
statement.
affected.
Thank you so much. I appreciate everything. We are going to allow these speakers to navigate through a lot of the topics that you're introducing. And I think everything that you said is so important and so critical for the conversation. So we're going to sit back and we're going to listen to these 6 professionals navigate through the critical topics that you're talking about. And so what I want us to do in the audience is I want us to pour into the chat. I want you to pour into the chat all of your ideas, all of your feelings and your thoughts around. And I will read through the chat and navigate through the conversation with the speakers so that they can chime in on some of those key topics and those key interests that you have so that we can move through this conversation and really highlight some answers that really allow us to dive into the critical ideas that you introduced. Because I know for a fact that no one here who is a panelist wants to see any of those things that you've spoken about, and they're working hard every day to try to address some of those topics. So we thank you so much for pouring onto us and providing that very, very in-depth understanding in your belief system around these ideas. We thank you so much. We're going to navigate through the rest of the questions, and as we do that, we're going to chime in on those things. We're really going to do that. So pour into the chat and let these speakers give you some tools and ideas to work with. Can we all do that? And I thank everybody. All right, Keith, answer your question, Derek, and then we're going to pull into trauma and we'll start talking about those key issues. Thank you. Okay, good. All right.
Okay, I guess going back to why, you know, I was very lucky. I think as a child, I had great role models, and in my parents, and so I was always raised with a philosophy of service. My parents were teachers, and you know, a very good sense of right and wrong. And I even at a young age, I disliked bullies. I disliked people that would take advantage of other kids. And so that stuck with me, you know, growing up. And I was lucky. I always knew I wanted to go into law enforcement. So, you know, I went to college. The college, I got recruited to play football, and they didn't have criminal justice. So, you know, my bachelor's is in accounting of all things. And after college, I went in the Marine Corps. And I did air-to-air intercepts. I was a officer in the Marine Corps, and I can tell you, air-to-air intercepts equates to nothing in the civilian world. But so I got it. After my stint in the Marine Corps, I got into law enforcement at the state level in New Jersey, and you know, and I had it offered me such diversity in the type of work. And I wasn't behind a desk, and I, you know, I was able to go to sniper school, and I was on our high risk entry team, and I did all these things that allowed me to kind of continue to have this diverse background. I went to the county because the county made more money. You know, I continued a lot of those things too, and I was able to write grants and I ran our fatal accident team and did all these things. And when I went to the federal level too, I worked for housing and urban development in the Northeast New Jersey and Newark. And our job was predominantly to pull wanted felons out of public housing and Section 8 housing with the marshals. And it was great because the residents really appreciated it, because they, a lot of these folks we were arresting were, wanted for murderers and shootings and, just heinous, sex crimes and things. So they were happy when we were there. And I can tell you, with the exception of the people being arrested, I never had a negative experience in any of those places. And I think too, we were there and I talked to everybody. I'd talk to anybody, which, again, is crucial, I think, to those that want to get into this profession. I always say it, your communication skills are the key to all of this, your common sense and communication skills. And even, when I was a detective, being able to find that common ground and being able to talk to people and diffuse these situations was extremely important. And then when I came to Fish and Wildlife, from Northeast New Jersey, a lot of people asked why. And again, it was, we always say we speak for things that can't speak for themselves. And again, that's what we do here. And I, people will ask, well, why did you take the certain positions you did? Isn't it nothing but headaches? And there are a lot of headaches that go along with being an administrator at this stage. I don't do many fun things anymore. It's budgets, it's personnel, it's those type of arguments. But that's what enables, that's what enables our young folks to get out there and do all that good work, is because, old guys like me sit in offices and fight with Congress and everything else to get more money. And that's why, I do what I do. And so I want to say hi to Luan. I haven't seen you in a while. We had a class together. So again, thanks. I appreciate this panel and I look forward to everybody's input.
Derek, you ready?
Yes, thank you. I think what's unique about my experience or why I do what I do is because I think some of my own personal traumas have kind of shaped me into the person I am and made me gravitate towards this field. I think growing up, I grew up in an area not too far from where your university is. Poor area, small town Ohio, surrounded by a lot of negative things. Like thankfully I had a loving family who gave me what they could as far as keeping me on the correct path. But for the most part, it was me finding my way to where I needed to go. And I knew I wanted a feeling that was different than the feeling that I got when I saw fights in the neighborhood, when I saw people selling drugs, when I saw people that I cared about getting arrested. I knew I wanted a feeling that was different than that. And that turned into mainly a law enforcement or criminal justice approach that I knew I wanted for my professional life. I didn't have it narrowed down exactly at that age, obviously, what I wanted to do. I just knew I wanted a feeling that was different than that traumatic feeling that I would get routinely. So that's kind of what led me to this field. And now that has evolved. I've kind of conquered those things within myself. So now my job is to try to help other people who are experiencing those things find the way out of it, as far as, to avoid being arrested, to avoid committing a crime. The unique thing about the Capitol building is everyone who has dealt with traumatic experiences, whether it's common or relevant at the moment or in the past, they all come here to push out their grievances. And those are the people you deal with on a day-to-day basis, whether they're not getting the money for their medication, for their mental health. All those things end up here, and those are the people that you deal with on a daily basis. So it's extremely important to be able to handle that. And being that I've understood, trauma of my own in the past when I was a lot younger, I think it helps me kind of deal with them in a more caring manner than someone who feels entitled by their position or can't understand that approach or where someone with trauma is coming from. So thank you, and I'm excited to be a part of the panel.
Thank you so much. I need to unpack for a second. So Remember, the question that we asked was the why. Why is it that you do what you do? And how is that helping you to address these issues? And just to unpack a little bit, even when someone has their worst day, you can still be there. Being there for people, even from your town or someone else, giving back to your community, being a listener and having a listening ear and being an advocate, that makes a difference. We can find out the field that matches our personality and our passion. Are we in the position that matches our personalities and our passions? Are we people who can support? Are we people who can make other people feel welcomed and safe? Do you understand your privilege? Do you understand your privilege? Everybody has a privilege or two. Do you understand what those things are? And are you invested in learning how to support the success strategies of other individuals? We can help individuals live the lives that they were born to live. We can help individuals live the lives that they were born to live. And we can explore a number of different units that allow us to pour onto people who need support. We can expand our skill sets and we can share our knowledge. And most importantly, and I love this, Derek, you can use your past and your present to encourage you to make a difference. Now that we understand the why, let's talk a little bit about the trauma that you see in your field of work, and then talk to us simultaneously about some of the challenges that you see in addressing that trauma. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to allow us to naturally answer these questions. So I'm going to maybe start with, I think, Aaron. And then after Aaron moves, if the next panelist who feels like their experience will align and connect closely to whatever she has to say, you're going to go next. And I'm going to trust that you all can do this because I know that you know how to do this. Okay?
That's a lot of trust.
Okay, I trust. But I'm going to jump in between. I'm going to be unpacking in the chat. I'm going to be unpacking. And so how this will work is you'll say these things and they'll stand out. And then I'll try to keep this going as if I were Oprah Winfrey's late cousin from whomever, wherever she was at. Okay, so I'm going to try to do that. All right, so Aaron, again, tackling what is the trauma and what are some of the challenges that you think exist in your space? Take it away.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate it. And let me start by saying I appreciate, Derek, thank you so much for sharing, your own personal experience with trauma, because sometimes that's one of the biggest challenges and the stumbling blocks is just this shame and stigma of trauma and what that means. And one of the things that I observe, and especially considering our culture, and to be clear, I'm like Martinsburg native, born and raised, Berkeley County, all that kind of good stuff, but is understanding what trauma means, because sometimes what maybe textbook says trauma is, or what individuals might say trauma is very different than what we really experience. So sometimes that's one of the biggest challenges, is just like breaking down that wall of what you experienced, whether you call it trauma or not, is still impacting you. It's still hindering you today. And that's what we're here to kind of work through and discuss. But I think that's one of the biggest things, but definitely when I'm viewing trauma in the workplace, it's with really essentially almost every single individual that walks through the door. And just being sensitive to that, knowing that, again, everybody's experience or the events, situations is different, but it doesn't make one person's trauma better or worse than the next person's trauma. It's about how our brain processes it. It's about the supports that we had around the events or situations that were happening. And again, just breaking down those walls of what that really means can be significant, and being able to make progress and headway through resolving a lot of this trauma. And I don't know if anybody else has kind of noticed that, again, just like culturally speaking, what is trauma and what is not trauma, and like the shame and the stigma around it. I don't know if it's unique to our area, but I think it's something that's worth noting.
I think in my profession, at least, I think a lot of times trauma is viewed as weakness to a certain extent. And I think that has a huge impact on, one, solving the problem, and two, people acting out because they're not dealing with this trauma that they've had in the past. For instance, being overly aggressive, arresting someone, something like that can be linked back to something you haven't dealt with yourself. And I think because of what law enforcement is and the mindset of a lot of people who take on the profession, unfortunately, actually talking about that problem or doing what I did, as far as I came up, having these issues myself, and that was motivation for me to get rid of that feeling or figure out how I can understand that feeling, transition it into something else, and then find someone else who also has that feeling that's much younger and explain to them how this worked for me. So I think a big problem in the law enforcement profession is viewing that as a weakness, and rather than, talking about it and seeing how it can actually benefit you in a positive way.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with with Derek. I've seen all kinds of trauma, from what one person can do to another, homicides, suicides, crib deaths. I've been to a couple hundred autopsies, and to say that an autopsy of a 1-week-old isn't traumatic, of course it is. And how do I deal with that when I got my own kids? I worked in major crimes, but we handled the overflow of, back then we called it sex crimes and child abuse. But, again, and that was when I was there, that was the beginning of really the internet and file sharing, and we still had Napster and, LimeWire for a lot of people. But that was the beginning of this epidemic of child pornography. And I handled the fatal accidents. We had another guy that worked on computer crimes. You have to sit there all day and looking at this hateful stuff, and to go home and then have to try to live a normal life. So, and everybody you deal with most of the time, right, in law enforcement is at some point in a traumatic event, whether it's something, a situation, a family situation that took 10 years, 15 years to build up to. It gets to the point where law enforcement is called, and then now you're there and you're expected, right, to unpack 15 years of family interactions in 5 minutes and make the right decision at the right time. So it's challenging, and I think that's part of the challenge we have in law enforcement. Is we continually, from the time I started and how I was taught, in an academy, I was taught by people that worked pre-Miranda. So it's, and as we evolve, as the profession evolves, we have more tools. When I worked, the taser is a fairly new concept. But when we worked, we didn't have it. There was just the beginning of body worn cameras, but they weren't even body worn, they were in cars. And so to be through that whole evolution has been quite interesting. But so everyone you come in contact to has experienced some level of trauma. Otherwise, law enforcement probably wouldn't have been called. So, you have to acknowledge that. And again, everybody handles it and deals with it differently, to include ourselves. And as we look at why we have an issue in the military and in law enforcement with suicides and substance abuse, and it's right, because, in the past, we didn't really discuss that, and you needed to handle your problems, and that led to other issues, high divorce rates, you name it. So again, we're much better as a profession, I think, in dealing with it. Are we perfect? No, but name one profession that is. We're certainly much more attuned to what's going on, and have identified a lot of these issues. And then it's up, and again, that's part of my responsibility, because I have the ability to make those decisions, right? So that's what I need to do, is focus our resources on that, to make sure that the officer on the street or our agent on the street, our inspector feels that support. So if they feel issues from, whatever's going on, they have that outlet to do. But again, and I say this to people that are in my classes that have me, or anyone that want to get into this, you're going to see and hear and experience a lot of trauma in this profession. That that hasn't changed from when I started, in the 90s to now. And we run these circles of the perception of law enforcement, and that's just going to continue. It's inevitable. Having worked the heyday of the crack days in the late 80s, early, the mid 90s, 2000s, then we had September 11th. That kind of changed everything to where we're at today. Is certainly, we have a lot of tools, but we're still, we still have a ways to go, and that's really where we need to kind of focus a lot of those resources. So hopefully that didn't wander too much all over the place.
Not at all. So I think they're sliding over to me here. I see all kinds of trauma in my work, and it ranges on different kinds and areas of trauma. And the woman that was speaking previously, I want to address a little bit of what you were dealing with as I was sitting in my seat going, this is the things I see. So when it comes to trauma overall, we deal with the trauma that the kids I meet come in with, that may be not directly or any way related to the crimes or alleged acts that they're charged with. I have a lot of kids that deal with anxiety, depression, and other mental health issues. Between the ages of 11 and 13 and 17 and 21 are the two biggest mental health breaks when it comes to hormones and otherwise when it comes to kids. So we see, and I work with kids as young as 9. The youngest I work with has been 9, up until 21, because the juvenile justice system in West Virginia goes up to 21. And I've seen a lot of times when we have 11-year-olds that may have broken the lamp with throwing it across the room, but are having a mental health psychiatric break. So they may be charged with that destruction of property, but the psychiatric break and the other issues are the underlying issues we have with that. Because undiagnosed mental health can lead to not only personal trauma of the child, not understanding their needs or wants or why things are working, it can also lead to family trauma, where we have parents that no longer feel safe around the child or otherwise. And helping a child is not a child in the vacuum. You need to support the family as well. We see the trauma from the actual acts that the child may be involved in. Because I work with kids that are charged with crimes, that is something that is also on the criminal side. If they were an adult, they could be placed in jail or prison. And we do have juvenile jails and juvenile prisons in West Virginia. They're called detention facilities, but they are still run by the same individuals that run the adult system. And then we also have those kind of crimes. And unfortunately, there is the chance for negative interactions with police officers in those interactions that are involved, and involving the circumstances on what possible traumas can range from some of those circumstances as well. Unfortunately, I've had kids that have had interactions with officers and ended up with broken bones or otherwise and other things. A 17-year-old boy can look a lot like a 19, 20-year-old me. And it's very hard in those split circumstances for the officers sometimes to make those decisions and otherwise. So we do have some trauma from sometimes those interactions. Then that leads to the trauma of the actual arrest. And there are studies that show that anytime you put handcuffs on a child, their chance of entering into the adult system exponentially jumps high. And that doesn't matter if they're 11, because I've seen kids as young as 11 in handcuffs, full body shackles and otherwise, or as old as 17 or 18. And with that, the process of having children arrested and placed in juvenile jails is an issue that we see kids that are traumatized by that. Although there is a lot of support and otherwise, there is a staffing shortage, and there is a low pay in West Virginia for correctional officers in no matter what level that you are working. And unfortunately, because of that, there can be some issues with regulation and watching these facilities, the issues that children have in these facilities. In a juvenile jail, a child as young as 11 or 12 can be strip searched. and will be strip searched if they leave and go to a court hearing. There's also other issues involving the fact that they are sleeping on these metal beds and other things along those lines. So there is some institutionalized trauma that we deal with as well with the kids. So we are on a big thing in West Virginia and across the country. There is a big push to stop indiscriminate shackling of children, which means if you have a child that has a history of being violent, or you feel as though the correctional officer or other officer involved feels that they could be a risk to their safety or court, then upon proof of that, the child would be handcuffed. But otherwise, a child that got angry and pushed mom does not need to be handcuffed, shackled, and body chained every time they enter the courtroom. It becomes a big issue with the child's self-esteem and the fact they view themselves as that future criminal, and they're looking in that. It becomes an issue for me as a defense attorney because this is a kid. And I can't tell you how many times the kids have sat there and played with the shackles and not paid attention to anything that's gone on in the court hearing, just because they're kids. And trying to keep a kid normally at attention in a stressful situation is hard. It also stops me from being able to have that full contact with them, for them to be able to write notes to me in court or things along those lines. So there's a real big push, and we're hoping to end indiscriminate shackling. Luckily, we have 2 out of 3 judges that work with juveniles in our circuit have stopped indiscriminate shackling of youth. So we're continuing in our area to work real hard and push and hope to make that statewide. We have the issues that we deal with trauma, and I'm so glad to have a resource officer, a school security officer here, because I think it's great to be able to have those positive aspects and positive workings in school. Unfortunately, there is a thing called the school to prison pipeline, which is the fact that the younger a child is and the more that a child is either put in school suspension, out of school suspension, or expelled, the greater chance they have to being placed in the adult prison system or in the juvenile justice prison system to lead to the adult prison system. So there's a lot of push and a lot of work by schools to work and handle what could be what they see sometimes is a kid kind of flipping out, or a fight in the hallway, maybe the fact that Johnny didn't sleep well last night because mom was up doing drugs or otherwise, and the resource officers are stepping in to be able to help and understand what is a behavioral needs to be fixed by suspension issue and what is more of a behavioral health issue. So there's a lot of work dealing with the trauma with that. When it comes to resources and things to be able to help with that, as they talked, we do have a lot of good resources when it comes to the school to prison pipeline that we're continuing to push, and there needs to be more grants. In Martinsburg, we have what's called Project Aware, which is the fact of we really need as many schools that have school resource officers. We need to have social workers, just as many in those schools. Right now, there's a 3-to-1 ratio of resource officers to social workers nationwide in schools. And the fact is that kids sometimes feel ostracized or don't want to go to a therapist or otherwise outside. I know, unfortunately, a lot of the parents that I work with in this area, that some of my children have kids in some of the more rural areas, they don't view mental health as something that exists. They believe that is just the child being weak, as I said earlier, about trauma. So a kid could be able to see a therapist or be able to see a counselor in school, and the parents not have to either be fully aware of it if there's an issue with the parent, or the fact not bring attention to it. And that's helpful as well. The issue with groups in support of children that have issues with substance abuse and that are issues that are dealing with trauma is the fact that we do not have service providers available to do this. The reason we do not have this is that West Virginia Medicaid is at an abysmally low amount. There is not the support for the Medicaid expansion programs that have been pushed, and West Virginia consistently has voted against expanding Medicaid and pushing the higher amounts. So with that, we are very few services and supports that are able to support these children. The law in West Virginia is written to keep kids in the least restrictive alternative available. It's a big word for keeping them home. The thing is that if we do not have the resources to keep them home, then the judges, and there's been some articles recently or otherwise that West Virginia has a big issue with placing children in residential treatment, therapeutic treatment facilities outside the state or inside the state as well. And the push is to try to maintain the children in the home. But without the grants, without the support, without the ability to have staffing, because right now we're losing what we have due to staffing issues, we don't have supports to be able to help the children like we really need them. Because a lot of times with intensive inpatient facilities, intensive intensive outpatient services that could mimic what they would get in inpatient, we will be able to help and support these kids the way we need them to. Because a lot of these kids we're seeing as red flagged as young as elementary school. And without being able to have those supports available, we're seeing them more and more in the juvenile justice. So I think I'm the one who went on longer with that to cover those things, but I wanted to address a lot of things that have been brought up earlier. But overall, what my major point was through the court system. And I'm so glad Erin's here because she addresses more of the adult side of things on that. But in the juvenile system, we see trauma in every kind of aspect and otherwise. Be able to have support and help for all of that is something that we are all actively working and supporting. But if you're in West Virginia, writing your senators, pushing legislation, letting them know that we want to be able to have the supports to be able to support these services is the best way that we can help address the trauma that we're seeing in these kids, which will be the adults.
Maybe chime in on that just a little bit. As far as like juveniles and adults, one of the things that we do here at Day Report that I am also involved in is juvenile drug court, which is a similar kind of setup as far as they're involved in the criminal justice system already. And we're providing treatment for them just like we do for our adults. We are working really closely with Project Aware in the schools, and Day Report, we're really lucky. Lucky maybe, I don't know. If you are aware, Berkeley and Jefferson County are federally identified as what we call HIDTA counties, high intensity drug trafficking areas. So we actually have a couple of federal grants right now that are specifically geared not to just working with juveniles or working specifically with adults, but working with families, because what we're seeing is just these family systems, and we really need that cultural shift if we want to stop this cycle of trauma that leads to the cycle of substance abuse and then more trauma and et cetera, et cetera. So there is some hope, but West Virginia Medicaid, it's a tough system. So I will echo that. Write your senators. All of these things matter when we're talking about providing treatment within our state.
I think she's on mute.
I was going to say the same thing.
It does focus around the families.
I'm sorry, if you asked a question, you were on mute for quite a while, so I don't know if we all heard that.
Almost looks like they're locked up now.
I don't mind answering one of the questions that are in the chat that just came through. As far as it says, and I appreciate the comment, just curious, are there any percentages of how well these programs are working? So Day Report, we actually collect a whole lot of data, because if you get federal grants, you have to collect the data. You have to prove that your program is working. So to date, in the last 5 years, we have had right around, I think the latest number, it changes a lot, 300 successful graduates, which means people that have completed at least our year-long program. And there's a lot of factors with that as far as like abstinence from substance and things like that. But in the year from October 1st, 2019 to September 30th, 2020, which I think we can all note was a really difficult year for all of us, the recidivism rate for our successful graduates was 18%, which is incredible. These individuals that have been involved in the criminal justice system, likely since they were juveniles, our recidivism rate went down. And then our new numbers from October 1, 2020 to September 30, 2022, we were 3 percentage points higher. It was 21% for our recidivism rate, which is still, again, pretty incredible. So there is proof that treatment is reducing incarceration, specifically reincarceration. Once we saw trauma, I shouldn't say solve, reduce trauma, substance misuse and addiction, we're going to naturally reduce incarceration, which is some pretty good evidence that it's working.
Yeah, I'm not sure what happened to him. So, I'm assuming everybody else is still on.
Yeah, the audience is still here.
Okay, all right.
Well, I can help a little bit. Until they get back, we can kind of try to answer some of the questions in the chat if you all would like to. There's a question here about resource allocation from outside of the state. Have you ever heard of anything pertaining to that?
Oh, I could actually give some input on this. So one of the things that I have studied in is like there's a lot of organizations and there's a lot of mental health programs as well as some government-owned research bases that could actually give us tools that we need to use for West Virginia. And what these services provide is they provide tools for schools, proper education on mental health and mental health crisis issues. They provide better training in counseling, as well as therapeutical evidence in medicine, and as well as research done on certain different types of cognitive therapies, behavioral therapies, as well as they have pediatrical doctors studying children with different types of like trauma, as well as like environments as well. So if a child grows up in a environment where there's a lot of crime, they have pretty much a really good database of how it links to the child's like mental health and behavior, which is fantastic. The one that I commonly use is the APA, which is the American Psychological Association, which is a really big staple in the psychological community, and just in general, a great database of researching tools, getting access for different like help about mental health and illness.
I agree. Oh, look, they're back.
And I think it's important.
Hello, ladies.
Hello, how's everybody doing?
I also think that not only do we
Sorry,
need
Keith, I
these
just started
resources,
taking questions from the chat here.
but I also think like just studying in general about these issues is really important. And I think not only do we not lack the funding for it, but I also believe outside the realm of just the public and where people and children are suffering, I also think law enforcement as well as other types of professions are suffering as well. 911 operators suffer a lot of traumatic injuries as well as PTSD, just like in law enforcement dealing with certain crisis situations. And I think that should be addressed, as well as the stigma in West Virginia about mental illness, especially since there's a gender bias about how males should be tough enough and tough it out, that kind of deal. Where it's biased. And I think it's important that we realize that as a state, and we take in consideration of other forms of behavioral therapy as well as psychiatric help, since there's only the programs that I've seen from where I am from and throughout the state where it focuses individually on the hospital, Berkeley Medical Center, as well as the Blue Ridge Center for mental health. That should not be only just be the case for that. It should be more like safe places for families to fall into. outside the realm of those places. You should never be in a hospital just because you have to stay there for mental health. You should at least have therapy or some type of intervention of some kind. But instead, you're hospitalized there. And I think that's important to take a look at in consideration of what's going on with our like behavioral and mental health issues, as well as the opioid crisis and other types of mental health crises.
Thank you. That's a great contribution. We appreciate that. Thank you. We do have another question for the panelists here. We talked about resilience and EI, that emotional intelligence. What are some ways that we can help build that kind of resilience, help support emotional intelligence?
Well, I think you need it. The best way is to model it and kind of lead by example. So, those were, again, emotional intelligence was a term that didn't exist when I started, and we just called it maturity, and how do we deal with that, and how do we build that, and how do we train that, or that awareness, if you will, into our supervisors and our leaders. And that's integral for our profession. So, and again, that is taught more just in at least my perspective, when we look at our basic law enforcement classes, that is a piece now, and that emotional intelligence is just included along the way. So we start in the basic, in those basic courses, and again, as you move or become more mature in the profession, that's always included, because it is so important, as well as resilience, and teaching people, that it's okay to be, have a point of view and argue your point of view, but we may not be able to do all those things, and a lot of people come like, hey, I got this great idea, and you're like, okay, it is a good idea for your little piece, but when we look at that across the nation, or across the globe, it can't work because of this, and this. But be able, instead of just saying no, to be able to go through that process and have that built into our folks, that you can't attach your ego to your position, because if you lose your position, then all of a sudden we're attacking your ego, and that's really not what it's about. So that was one of Colin Powell's rules, so everybody should read his books. But that, from my perspective, that's just how we have to identify it, explain to people what exactly it is. And I don't know, my youngest is just a senior in high school, so I'm not sure if they're even teaching that in schools, or where you fit that in their curriculum. But professionally, we are, because it's so important. Thanks.
Also, as far as emotional intelligence goes, I think a big part of it is, well, I know a big part of it is self-awareness. And I think if more people in our profession, in my profession, become more self-aware, and then have the ability to self-regulate some of the things that they do, I think that goes a big step in advancing your emotional intelligence, and having more empathy in situations. And I think those are big keys to it. Self-awareness, to me, I think, as far as emotional intelligence goes, being aware, of what you do as a person, and when you're off base and when you're wrong. I think if you have a good understanding of that, I think empathy and those other things come along with that. But to me, self-awareness is the key.
Yeah, and I think you need a sense of humor. Like, if you're going to get into this profession, any one of these, there's what, 6 of us, and Dr. Howard Bostic's here. You need to have a sense of humor, especially about yourself, but about everything, I've been called all kinds of names, and some were, obviously they were derogatory, but when you laugh and you're like, wow, I've never heard that, no one's ever called me that before. And it's disarming for people. And you're like, and that it's going to happen. And you have to, again, just, if you can, have a sense of humor about yourself and what you're doing. I don't know how many times people are like, Don't you have anything else better to do? And I'm like, well, yeah, but this is what I'm doing right now. It's just puts people off guard. Or you're like, hey, how you doing? Like, I walk down the streets in some of the worst neighborhoods in Newark, and I'd be like, hey, how you doing? How's it going? And people, guys would be all like very hard, that tough look when you're like, hey, good morning. And they would like, what? Well, what do what, you're talking to me? And I'm like, hey, how's it going? And so that's just how, if you're going to get, regardless of whether you're going to look at the social work aspect or the pure law enforcement part of it, you got to have a sense of humor, particularly about yourself, because, otherwise you're just not going to, you will burn out, and you'll take everything so seriously. You'll take, and I'm sure Derek will tell you, even very good organizations, there's still problems within them. There's still internal politics and strife and all these things. So, you just have to have a sense of humor about things and be able to laugh about it at the end of the day. So.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for your patience. I want to dig down into this conversation about safe spaces. So Keith talked to us a little bit about having a sense of humor and, lightening things up a little bit. Sometimes we have to do that. But let's talk about spaces that we create for other people to feel comfortable, even while they're experiencing trauma or whatever it is that they're going through. So in your professions, what do you do other than, being able to have a sense of humor, helping people to feel, at least like they can laugh even when things are really, really difficult? What are some of the things that we can do to help people to feel more safe?
In a school setting, you got to be able to, first of all, be honest. You can't feed them lies. You have to be honest. But at the same token, you have to put yourself in their shoes. I mean, you're speaking from an adult, and I'm in a school system, so they're still children. They're still learning. You can't expect them to know everything. So you have to build that rapport. You have to be honest and upfront and make them understand that I'm here for you. I'm not here to turn you into the police. I'm not here to make a decision if you're right or wrong or where you live is bad. I'm here to help. And you just have to be open and have that trust. The big word is trust. They have to be able to trust you. You can't yell, you can't scream, because most of these kids are coming from a family that mom and dad, uncle, brother, they just scream, holler. You have to make them feel that they are important. And by being important, you don't just say, yeah, blow them off. You have to listen. And when I say listen, meaning not in one ear and out the other and make an assumption. You have to listen and try to understand, meet them where they are, right where they are at that time, at that purpose, and not be judgmental at all. You have to put all that away. I know all of us on the panel, we have different jobs, different places. We're not there to judge. We're there to help. We don't, as often as it seems, the police officer is coming to arrest you. And before the other question is, if you know better, you'll do better. And we can't have history keep repeating itself. It seems to repeat itself over and over and over again, but we got to stop that. We have to understand that a police officer is coming to help. A social worker is walking in to help. An advocate is in the courtroom to help. A security officer is here to help. We're all here to help. We've been young before, and we just have to make sure that everybody in that situation, even adults, we're there to help. So the main thing is on my end is to build rapport and trust.
Can I jump in real quick? Just because it's kid to kid, I want to jump on that real quick. Absolutely, trust is huge. And I think it goes hand in hand with humor as well too. And because you have to have some light humor, because kids themselves are nervous to begin with anyway, to have some humor about yourself as well. Gaining that rapport and that trust. My children and I have an attorney-client privilege relationship. I represent the child. I do not represent the parents. I don't represent any interest but them. Anything the child and I say alone falls under attorney-client privilege, just as if they were over 18, which is something hard and most kids barely grasp. There's a lot of Law and Order references that are put in because most of them have seen one of those episodes by then. But I try to do my best from the very beginning to gain that trust with the kids. I give them my business card. I give it to the parents afterwards, but them the business card first, so they understand that I am their voice and trying to be able to work with them. As she said, meet them where they're at. Don't use big words when you're working with somebody that you have a feeling that won't understand or feel like you're talking down to them. Or for kids, they just don't understand it. So using small words, small terms to explain what's going on is huge. But absolutely getting that trust, which sometimes may not happen the first time or the second time or otherwise, but finding that foot in the door, any kind of connection. I have a history of alcoholism in my family and experienced it when I was quite young with a family member. And when I have kids that I have a feeling that are in a similar situation or have trauma experiences otherwise, I feel comfortable with that vulnerability of sharing some of that story with those kids. So that again, they understand to a point where I don't recognize and understand where you're at this point, but please understand that I have some of the similar circumstances. I find to be really helpful in opening up. But overall, making that safe space really comes down, I think, to trust and being able to make sure that they feel heard. So most of my conversations are the kid focused. Tell me what happened. Tell me what's going on. Things like that. And when they realize that I tell them that I'm their human megaphone in court and that I have to tell them what the court tells them and that I'm their boss, that they're my boss by law. Once they have some of that feeling is when you start to see them open. So absolutely meeting them where they are and gaining trust, at least when it comes to the kids. And probably most individuals, when you have something very personal and they're scared to tell, kind of a secret kind of thing, would definitely help.
Just very quickly, I guess more of a tangible that I always found effective was to change their environment. Literally take them out of it, using your human and emotional intelligence and seeing, okay, this person's uncomfortable, right? So, how can I change this immediately, right? Do we need to leave the building? Do we need to go around the corner? Do we need to go somewhere where it's quiet, where there aren't ambulances and sirens and yelling? And then kind of like when you're doing your follow-up work as well, there are people that are plain and simple, not comfortable coming to the police department. Is it possible to meet them somewhere else and, engage them in a setting where they feel safer and more at home?
I think for my profession and the unique thing about where I work, I think pieces of everything that everyone has said kind of come together, and I use those, or we use those as tactics to try to make someone feel safe. A lot of times when someone's going through trauma or they're dealing with something and they're up here airing a grievance, or maybe it's a mental health issue, a lot of the times they just want to be listened to. And if you would just listen to them instead of telling them what to do, I think it brings them down automatically. So if you could listen, make them feel important, that may just be separating them from everyone else and making them feel like you're only paying attention to them. I think that brings them down. And then if you could draw a parallel between something that's happened in your life with what they're experiencing as well. And the difference is, unfortunately, sometimes you may have to be dishonest in these circumstances to bring these people down. Whereas with children, you really never want to be dishonest. But a lot of times in these circumstances, you may have to exaggerate your parallel to try to meet up with theirs. But once you do that and they can see themselves in you somewhat, they feel a lot more safe, and you can see their body language come down and you can see them want to communicate a lot more. So those are some of the things that I've used over my 14 or 15 years.
Okay, thank you so much for that, everyone. And I am unpacking in the chat. I hope everybody is paying close attention to the chat and seeing some of these ideas that we can make to be very applicable. It is 6:57, and I know you all know what that means. That means that I'm going to have to try to unpack what we just talked about and let everybody prepare for the time that they're going to set aside for Thursday when we have our big diversity and equity trauma-informed care conference that you all are going to attend and spend another lovely evening with us, because we are going to take everything that we learned in the last couple of days to the next level. Today, we had an awesome experience where we were able to look from an officer's perspective and from a criminal justice perspective at passion for communicating and dealing with people across different backgrounds, no matter who they are in your field of study, no matter who they are in your field of study. You're interacting with people who are human beings who may not experience the same things that you experience on a regular basis, but you are utilizing your emotional intelligence to create the context for safety for them. We do understand that there are a large number of challenges and problems, but we also know that there are things individually that we can do utilizing just our basic senses in order to create that space for them. We talked about changing our physical environment. We talked about doing things like listening and doing things like creating a centered piece where you can talk about who you are as an individual and what you've gone through, or maybe sometimes you inflate that a little bit just to create something that somebody else needs. So this is like thinking outside of the box about how you can appease and how you can help people feel like they are part of the environment. And this means that you're doing it intentionally. You're speaking to people who intentionally make it their business to create a safe space for the people who are around them every day, no matter what their role is. Meaning the people who have made bad choices, they are still making a connection for them and not just throwing their opportunities away and throwing away the sense of them being special. That everybody, in fact, has a space to exist, and that we should do what we need to do to make sure that that's possible. And that takes a lot. It may take even a special individual to do that, right? Because we do have a panel of people who've done that for the most of their lives in their different careers. But we're asking you to think about how you can do that on the job, on your job every day. And that may be a stretch for people, right? That may be a stretch for in your life, how you could take the advice and take the words that were provided by this team here to use that to think critically about how you can become more emotionally intelligent and understand that trauma does not have a background. Trauma doesn't have a name. Trauma doesn't have a street that it lives on. Trauma, in fact, is everywhere. And the pandemic has heightened that trauma, as we learned yesterday when we talked to some of our nurses and our social workers, when we talked about the trauma that exists in their career field. So again, I want you all to keep your thinking caps on. If you haven't registered for our main event on this Thursday, I will send you a registration link to this lovely email address that you put in the chat with your first and last name. So I will be there for you for that. I will be sending that to you. And I thank you for coming today. This will not be the last time that you hear from the people who are on these panels, on this panel. These people also speak during our criminal justice lecture series events that we have. And they're also people who you can contact to just communicate about those issues, because they're going to put their contact information in the chat for you right now so that you can reach out to them at a time that is most convenient for them and for you. I thank you all again. It's been interesting with utilizing the in-person and online event structure, but we did it. We did it together. So thank you again. Put your information in the chat for me. I'm going to need for you to do that so that we can stay in touch and in tune. And it was wonderful having every single panelist here. Thank you for your contributions, and thank you for your hard work and commitment to everybody.
Thank you.
Your lives. All right. Logging. I'm not gonna log off. I'm gonna stay right here. But everybody else, go get something to eat. It's been real.
Yeah.
All right, panelists, don't go anywhere if you can help it. I'm gonna stop the recording.